Imagine trying to build like a 10-year corporate strategy in a landscape where your local currency might just have in value tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
Or, the industrial power grids routinely fail and political regimes can just shift overnight.
It's basically a nightmare for traditional planning.
Right. For most organizations, that level of volatility is a built-in excuse to fail. It's just, too hard. But for a select few, it is actually the ultimate blueprint for building an untouchable legacy.
Yeah, that's the fascinating part.
So today, we are doing a deep dive into how to move out of that daily grind, just putting out fires all the time.
Right, the survival mode.
Exactly.
No.
We want to understand how to move from that momentum-based survival to architecting something enduring.
Yes.
And our map for this is Suleman Anwar's book, Strategic Management, From Vision to Transformation.
And I just have to say, it is a phenomenal source, specifically because of the laboratory it uses to study these concepts.
Yeah, it really doesn't pull any punches.
No, it completely ignores the comfortable, predictable markets of the West. It focuses entirely on the business and institutional landscape of Pakistan.
Which is just widely dynamic.
Right. If you are a listener trying to future-proof your own career or your company, watching how organizations survive in an environment defined by extreme pressure. I mean, it offers incredibly raw, unfiltered insights.
Total.
You're dealing with massive demographic shifts, severe energy constraints, but also this incredibly potent, untapped entrepreneurial dynamism.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can start applying these lessons to our own chaotic projects, we really need to ground ourselves in the source's philosophy.
Yeah, we had to start with the basics.
Right, so we all know Michael Porter's classic framework, right?
Yeah.
Deliberate positioning, making strict trade-offs about what your company is and is not going to be.
The classic architect approach.
Exactly. But my immediate reaction reading this was that Porter's model relies heavily on predictable industry structures.
Yeah.
So in a market as chaotic as Pakistan's, isn't defining exactly what you're not going to be just, I don't know, a fancy way of painting yourself into a corner?
Well, that is the exact tension the book explores. It frames it as the great synthesis.
Okay.
On one side, you have Porter's architects, so the deliberate planners. On the other, you have Henry Mintzberg's concept of emergent strategy.
Where you're just kind of figuring it out as you go.
Essentially, yeah. Strategy as a learning process, adapting continuously to the unpredictable terrain. But what is brilliant about the source is how it demonstrates that even in a volatile market, Porter's rigid positioning can be a massive weapon.
If applied correctly, I assume.
Right, if it's applied to your core identity. Look at the fashion retail brand Coty, for example.
Oh, their application of it is wild, because they use Porter's framework to intentionally restrict their own growth.
Yeah, deliberately holding back.
Which seems completely counterintuitive, right? When you have a massive fashion-hungry youth demographic practically throwing money at you.
The instinct for any successful brand in a developing market is to just mass produce. Dilute the quality and scale as fast as humanly possible just to grab that market share.
Just take the cash while it's there.
Exactly. But Coty deliberately slowed down. They made a really painful trade-off to protect their premium, hand-woven brand identity.
So they said, we are not going to be everything to everyone.
Yes. They chose to not be a generic mass-market retailer, and that deliberate positioning protected their margins and their brand equity long-term.
But then you have a company like Jazz,
Yeah.
the telecom giant, and they act as the ultimate proof of Mintzberg's emergent model.
Complete opposite end of the spectrum.
Right. They didn't just write a 10-year blueprint for cellular towers and blindly march forward while the world changed around them.
Well, they couldn't. I mean, the regulatory environment and consumer habits were just shifting way too fast.
Yeah.
They started by providing basic voice services, but their real strategy was simply observing the market's pain points. As smartphone penetration grew alongside this massive unbanked population, Jazz pivoted aggressively into digital finance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they eventually dominated the space with Jazz Cash. Their strategy emerged directly from the mud and the friction of the real world.
It's kind of like planning a cross-country road trip.
Okay, I like that.
Right. So Porter's approach is meticulous planning with a GPS. You program the destination, and you just follow the blue line.
You don't deviate.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But Mintzberg's approach is more like taking a four-wheel drive off-roader with heavy suspension. You know generally that you need to go north, but you are turning the wheel in real time based on the washed-out bridges and the mudslides you actually encounter on the ground.
That's a great way to put it. And the reality for anyone managing a team today is that you really need both.
Yeah, you do.
Because a GPS is absolutely useless if your axle breaks in a ditch, and a great suspension means nothing if you are just driving in circles.
Which brings up the absolute headache of having to monitor two realities at once.
It's a lot to juggle.
It really is.
Yes.
If you're driving that off-road vehicle, you have to watch the weather and the terrain outside your windshield. But you also have to constantly monitor the temperature gauge of the engine inside your car.
Right, the internal and the external.
And the source talks about this as the dual logics of strategy, the outside-in versus the inside-out approach.
Yeah, so let's look at the mechanics of the outside-in approach first. This is rooted in the industrial organization, or IO model.
Okay.
This model forces an organization to assess external structures to find competitive advantage. You analyze supplier power, buyer behavior, global headwinds, and then you position yourself where the friction is lowest.
So you're finding the path of least resistance in the market.
Exactly. The textile giant Nishop Mills is the textbook case here in the source. They rigorously analyzed global textile quotas and supply chain shifts. They saw the headwinds facing basic commodity exports and deliberately pivoted their entire external positioning to target high-value fabrics across diversified global markets.
They read the weather and set their sails.
Perfect analogy, yes.
But then you have the resource-based view, right? The inside-out logic, which feels almost like the opposite philosophy.
It really is a completely different starting point.
Because instead of obsessing over market trends, you look at your internal engine and ask, what is the one thing we do better than anyone else in the world?
Exactly. And for the company Interloop, which the text highlights, it wasn't about chasing a fleeting fashion trend. It was their world-class, heavily refined internal capability in knitting.
Just being the absolute best at that one thing.
Right. They started as a hosiery supplier, but because their internal engine was so powerful, they forced their way outward. They scaled that specific capability to become a global apparel powerhouse.
But the challenge, and I love how the book illustrates this with a visual of interlocking watch gears.
Yeah.
The challenge is achieving true strategic fit.
Yes. External fit means your strategy matches the chaotic market conditions. Internal fit means your organizational structure, your culture, and your compensation models match your strategy.
I have to push back on this idea of perfect strategic fit, though.
Oh, why is that?
Because getting all the tiny, delicate internal gears of a corporate hierarchy to mesh perfectly with a chaotic, unpredictable market outside, I mean, it sounds like an academic fantasy. How often do companies actually pull that off?
Well, honestly, it is exceptionally rare, which is exactly why the failure rate of new strategies is so incredibly high.
Right.
The text serves as a stark warning about the mechanics of misalignment. I mean, think about it. If you are a listener trying to push an agile, rapid innovation strategy into the market, but your internal gears consist of a rigid 7-layer bureaucratic approval process.
Oh, your machine will literally tear itself apart.
Exactly. Or consider a company that publicly declares a strategy of radical customer centricity. Yet internally, their performance reviews only reward employees for aggressive, short-term cost cutting.
The gears just grind to a halt.
Because the internal reality actively sabotages the external promise.
Okay, so let's imagine you do the impossible.
Yeah.
You align your internal culture with the external chaos. You find that elusive strategic fit. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, lay it on me.
If your strategy is that successful, what stops a well-funded competitor from simply looking at your business model, copying the entire thing, and outspending you?
And that brings us to one of the most powerful concepts in the text activity systems.
Yeah, this part blew my mind.
True competitive advantage isn't just a clever marketing slogan, or a single killer product. It is expressed through a dense web of daily interconnected activities that not only generate immense value, but are specifically designed to block imitation.
Yeah, looking at the Anglo Foods case study with their Ulper's milk brand, what stood out to me was that their competitive moat had almost nothing to do with milk processing itself.
Right, the processing was the easy part.
They practically had to build the country's rural infrastructure just to make the business viable.
They engineered a deeply integrated cold chain system from absolute scratch. If you break down the mechanics of their activity system, it starts at the most granular level, village-level milk collection networks that were paired directly with veterinary support and farmer training programs.
So they aren't just buying milk, they are fundamentally embedding themselves into the economic survival of the rural farmers.
Correct. That first node secures the raw material and upgrades its quality immediately. The next node is logistics.
Which in that market is tough.
Oh, incredibly tough. In a country where the climate is punishing and the energy infrastructure is highly unreliable, Engro built an expansive network of temperature-controlled transport and chilling centers.
Uh,
And only after those operational realities were locked into place did they actually launch the Olpers brand, promising safety and purity.
so the marketing was just the visible tip of a massive hidden operational spear.
Beautifully put. Yes.
It makes me think of a competitor trying to take down a master chef.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
Right, so if you want to copy Olper's packaging, that's like copying the chef's plating. Any amateur can buy the same square ceramic plate.
Sure.
But trying to replicate Engro's entire vertically integrated activity system, that is like trying to magically clone the chef's entire kitchen staff, steal their secret 20-year relationships with local farmers, and like reverse engineer the exact ambient humidity of their kitchen.
Yeah, it's virtually impossible.
It is a mathematical impossibility for a competitor to just copy it.
The interconnectedness is the defense mechanism. Even if a rival understands the system, the sheer friction of replicating every single mutually reinforcing node requires a level of capital and flawless execution that deters almost everyone.
But, I mean, an uncopyable cold chain mode is absolutely useless if the people running it are paralyzed by a corrupt local bureaucracy or internal infighting.
Ah, yes, the human element.
Right. Because strategy always seems to die in the implementation phase. You can draw the best watch gears on a whiteboard, but someone actually has to cut the metal.
The source anchors this reality with Peter Drucker's famous maxim. Management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things.
Which is so true.
And in the Pakistani landscape, the text makes it painfully clear that implementation is the graveyard of brilliant strategies. You are dealing with severe institutional bottlenecks, inconsistent regulatory enforcement, and a persistent lack of formal infrastructure.
So how does a leader actually push a strategy through that kind of swamp without either getting paralyzed by the complexity or compromising their own ethics?
The strategist has to view the battlefield through what the text calls the three strategy lenses.
Okay, what are they?
First, you need the design lens. You must be an architect, building analytical, structured plans. Second, the experience lens. You must be a learner, relying on cultural intuition and historical knowledge to adapt when the plan inevitably hits a wall.
Because it will hit a wall.
It always does. And third, the ideas lens. You must be an artist, fostering an environment that welcomes disruption and constant renewal.
But practically speaking, those lenses still have to be applied to human beings.
Right, absolutely. Which is why the text emphasizes specific pillars in Pakistan for leadership. You cannot execute strategy in a deeply collective culture by simply emailing a formal contract and expecting compliance.
That just won't work.
No, you have to leverage social capital. You have to build profound, trust-based relationships that act as a shadow infrastructure when the formal institutions fail. Furthermore, the leader must drive ethical governance. Strategy cannot just be a tool for maximizing quarterly profit. It must create sustainable value for the entire ecosystem.
Because pure profit-driven strategy in a volatile market is basically building a skyscraper on sand.
Perfectly said.
If you extract wealth without enriching the local ecosystem, like Engro did with their farmers, the system eventually collapses under its own inequality. And that concept of ethical governance creating sustainable value, I mean, that scales way beyond corporate dairy farms. It applies to national survival.
It scales to the very top. The text visualizes this as the cascading levels of strategy. At the base, you have functional strategy, so how HR or marketing execute their daily tasks.
Right, the day-to-day.
Then in the middle, you have business strategy. Think of how Mizan Bank analyzed the financial sector and found a unique, highly defensible position to become the undisputed leader in Islamic finance.
Okay, making sense.
And above that is corporate strategy, managing an entire portfolio of businesses. But the source zooms out even further, applying these exact principles to the macro-level evolution of national strategy.
Seeing the history of a nation mapped out as a series of strategic pivots rather than just random political events is honestly fascinating.
It really reframes history. The text traces this evolution across several distinct eras. In the 1950s and 60s, the national strategy was defined by state-led planning and aggressive, heavy industrialization.
Okay.
But then, the 1970s brought a massive strategic shift toward nationalization and central control. And this wasn't just a random policy whim, it was a deliberate, albeit highly disruptive, strategic pivot aimed at democratizing wealth.
Right.
However, by nationalizing industries, it severely disrupted the private business landscape, breaking established value chains and efficiency models.
So the gears of the internal economy misalign with the demands of the external global market.
Precisely. That misalignment eventually forced the deregulation and privatization waves of the 1990s, aimed at unlocking market forces again. Moving into the 2000s and 2010s, the strategy shifted toward harnessing entrepreneurial dynamism and attempting global integration.
And where does the text say we are now?
Today, it defines the current national strategic era as a push for digitalization, sustainability, and knowledge-based ecosystems.
Which brings us to the ultimate comparison in the book. The two foundational visions for the country, separated by an exact century. Vision 1947 versus Vision 2047.
And just to be completely clear for our listeners, we're impartially detailing the framework exactly as the source provides it, not taking any political stance ourselves here.
Exactly. We are just conveying the ideas in the book.
So Vision 1947 is rooted deeply in the founding ideals, specifically referencing Jinnah's address on August 11, 1947. That original strategic blueprint envisioned a nation of equal citizenship. It explicitly outlined a modern democratic welfare state where religion remained separate from the business of the state.
Right.
It promised absolute freedom of worship and sought to build an Islamic democracy based on equality and tolerance rather than a theocratic system.
And the external positioning of that 1947 strategy was focused entirely on goodwill and peace with neighboring nations.
Yes.
Contrast that with Vision 2047, the strategy for Pakistan at 100 years. It outlines 5 pillars, but what is crucial is how these pillars must interlock to solve the historical bottlenecks we just talked about.
Let's look at the mechanics of 2 of those major pillars: economic resilience and human development.
Yeah.
Economic resilience demands a transition from a fragile, consumption-driven economy to a robust, tech-driven production economy. But if you attempt that transition without executing the human development pillar, which calls for universal literacy and massive skills training, you are left with a massive youth bulge that is entirely unemployable in a digital world.
The strategy just fails in implementation.
Exactly. The gears grind. You also have governance reform, moving toward meritocracy and performance-based accountability. You have environmental stewardship, which is an existential requirement given the severe climate vulnerability of the region. And finally, global integration, trying to position the nation as a hub of connectivity.
So what does this all mean? When the text places the founding ideals of 1947 alongside the rigorous demands of Vision 2047, it arrives at a synthesis it calls the architecture of national renewal.
It's a powerful concept.
It is. The ultimate conclusion is a stark warning for any leader. Economic growth that is divorced from ethical governance inevitably breeds deep instability. And technological innovation that is divorced from social inclusion simply accelerates mass inequality.
It completely reframes strategic management. It isn't some dry academic discipline reserved for consultants trying to boost quarterly shareholder returns.
Right, it's not just spreadsheets.
No, it is the literal blueprint for rebuilding broken institutions and generating collective prosperity in a world that feels increasingly out of control. Fusing knowledge with virtue, fusing technology with empathy, fusing profit with profound purpose.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the entire thesis of the book can be distilled into one undeniable truth. Strategy is destiny made deliberate.
I love that line.
It's the core message. The organizations, the nations, and the individuals who will actually win the future are not the ones who simply happen to sit on the richest natural resources. It will be those who possess the clarity to design their future and the moral will to execute it. They choose to rise not by chance, but by design.
Rise not by chance, but by design. That is a heavy, necessary thought to carry forward. And, it brings this whole conversation right back to you, the person listening to this right now. We spent time exploring Engro's uncopyable activity system, how every single one of their daily operations, from the village collection to the cold trucks, interlocks to create their massive competitive moat.
Yeah, that interlocking system.
Right. So think about your own life, your own career, and your own team. Your daily habits, the meetings you prioritize, the skills you choose to learn or ignore. Those are the interconnected nodes of your very own personal activity system.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Look at how those gears are currently aligned in your life. What kind of long-term legacy is your system designed to produce? Are you steering the vehicle and rising by design, or are you just bouncing over the potholes, surviving by default? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of strategy and transformation. Keep learning, keep auditing your own activity systems, and we will catch you next time. Imagine trying to build like a 10-year corporate strategy in a landscape where your local currency might just halve in value tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
Or, the industrial power grids routinely fail and political regimes can just shift overnight.
It's basically a nightmare for traditional planning.
Right. For most organizations, that level of volatility is a built-in excuse to fail.